Hello and welcome to Vibrant Lives podcast. This is a podcast dedicated to your health and well-being, where I interview experts about nutrition, physical health and mental health. I'm Amanda Hayes, your host. I'm a lawyer who retrained as a nutrition scientist, and I'm on a quest to learn as much as I possibly can about living a healthy, active and fulfilling life, which I would call a vibrant life, hence the name of this podcast, and sharing what I learn with you here on this podcast. As most of you know, the health and nutrition space can be a confusing one, and identifying reliable, trustworthy sources of information is not always straightforward. My aim is to help you do that by speaking with knowledgeable guests who can explain their own area of expertise in an accessible way and provide you with practical tips that you can use to improve your own well-being. Before I introduce today's guest, I'll quickly acknowledge that any information or advice provided in Vibrant Lives podcast is not intended to be used to treat or prevent medical conditions, and it is never, of course, a substitute for advice from your own health professionals. Today, I am here with psychotherapist Marie Rowland. Marie runs her own private practice, Talking Matters, in Sydney's Northern Beaches. In August, I read an article that Marie wrote in the Wellbeing magazine about how to boost your emotional immunity. It was an excellent article with some practical advice about how to help protect ourselves from stress, sadness, and loneliness. And today we'll delve into that advice and more. So this for me was a really enjoyable, generous, and uplifting conversation, and it's my pleasure to share it with you. So today I'm here with Marie Rowland, and Marie, I'm so excited to have you on Vibrant Lives podcast. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Amanda. It's absolutely lovely to be here.
So I'd like to start, Marie, with some quick questions to get to know a little bit about you outside your work as a psychotherapist and director of Talking Matters. So Marie, where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in the UK and lived there for a few years. My father was an engineer and he got moved around the place. So we country hopped for a bit and landed in Melbourne. But I've spent the last 20 years, for most of my career, I've spent it up here in Sydney.
Mm-hmm. So would you call Sydney home now these days?
You know, for a long time, I would have been going back and forth from Melbourne to Sydney. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I was sort of split between the two cities. But yes, my kids were born up here in the Northern Beaches in Sydney. So I think even more than Sydney, I would now say that I'm a Northern Beaches girl.
Yeah. We lived in Sydney for several years, and I have numerous friends there, and I do understand the whole Northern Beaches versus Sydney versus the Sutherland Shire, the Sutherland Shire, the South.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah. You're right. There are definitely factions, isn't there? It definitely feels like that. Yes.
Yeah. So yes, you sort of identify more with the place you live in as opposed to the Sydney sider.
I think that's right.
And your favourite form of exercise?
Oh, you know, I'm very ecumenical like that. I do a lot of yoga and I do some Pilates, but I have been studying flamenco for 25 years.
Oh, lovely.
And I went to Spain many, many years ago and went to a show and fell in love with it. So in between kids and you know, various incarnations as far as professions are concerned, I've always kept my feet in the sort of the flamenco pool, so to speak. And so that's a big part of my sort of cultural life. That's a great passion of mine. Dance has always been a great passion of mine. So yes.
Oh, that's wonderful. I had two friends, they did a similar thing. They studied flamenco for years, and we used to go and watch them dance, and they had, I'm sure you have the same amazing outfits, gorgeous, voluptuous skirts, and it's just wonderful. Mm.
Oh, and are they Adelaide people? Because the flamenco world is actually quite small. So I would possibly know their teachers and various other things.
You probably would. They haven't danced for a number of years, or certainly not publicly. But yes, if you spoke to them, within 2 seconds, you'd have connections, I am sure.
Yes.
And your go-to meal for dinner, say on a weeknight?
Oh, that was a really interesting question. I I actually have. I'm kind of really now into simple food, to tell you the truth. Years and years ago, I loved sort of extravagant restaurant meals, but then sort of after a while, it became a little bit too rich for me.
Yeah.
So just honestly, I love sushi. I love salmon sashimi.
Yum.
That is a really, especially if I'm in between sessions, that would be, my go-to.
Yeah, healthy and quick and, as you say, simple. What are you enjoying listening to at the moment? Like audiobook, music, could be anything.
Well, look, I'm very eclectic in my tastes with music. And I do like to listen to music, definitely as sort of, when I just want me to relax and decompress. That's, something that I love. I must admit, in my profession, you never stop learning. And, it's a bit like there's sort of the Taoist sort of saying of, I know that I don't know. So I must admit, I'm kind of a bit of a psychology junkie.
Yeah.
I'm constantly sort of, seeking further professional development and, listening to, podcasts, from a variety of different sources, talking about very dry topics, from trauma to grief management. And it is, I know it is a little bit kind of clinical. I do love reading, but it's really funny. And, COVID was the perfect opportunity to sort of get into reading. But I've moved more towards more to professional development reading at this time. Yes.
It's hard to fit in all the reading that one would like to do, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I used to be in a book club though, and it was brilliant because we had to read literature as opposed to the soft sort of fiction that was out, and that was a great discipline actually, to read really good novels. So post-COVID, I think we should be definitely getting back into those lovely communities again and doing that type of thing, because it's also really good for your mental health.
It certainly is. And the thing I like about book clubs is it makes you read a book that perhaps you may not otherwise have selected for yourself, and it turns out to be something really interesting that you enjoy.
Absolutely. And it's lovely to discuss them afterwards.
It is.
To discuss in my practice, I do something which is called bibliotherapy. And it means that, so for instance, by talking to a client about an issue that they have, and it reminds me of a particular character in a novel, I'll often, or even with film as well, I'll often relate it back to that character. And, because their story is a narrative, every client has their own story. So if you can reflect back to them a story, usually, of course, it's it's fictional, but it can be a great way of them being able to understand their own situation. So it's kind of a very creative way for people to sort of look into their own lives. And
that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's brilliant, actually.
Yeah, I've never heard of that before, bibliotherapy. Yeah. And Marie, your dream holiday destination?
Oh, the dream holiday destination. I always would say Paris, because I love Paris. to me, that's, and I would actually probably even say even more generally France, because of going down south and everything like that. But I think being a mum and having kids and constantly running around, anywhere where you can sit on a poolside with a drink with an umbrella in it, and where you don't have to think about, food lists, shopping lists, or what you're going to cook that night. That to me at the moment is looking like, and that could be anywhere where you can see the horizon, I'm there.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds lovely. I guess your dream holiday fits the stage of your life, doesn't it?
Yes.
In terms of what you need to relax and nourish yourself. Marie, you're a psychotherapist and you received your postgraduate qualifications from the Australian College of Applied Psychology.
That's right.
So, and we will be talking more about that, obviously, but what did you do before becoming a psychotherapist and doing the postgraduate study?
I've had, like yourself, Amanda, I've had a number of incarnations. When I first, I went and did a Bachelor of Arts degree at the University of Melbourne, and then I did a diploma in fashion design, and actually became a fashion designer in my early 20s.
Wow.
Doing wholesaling, retailing, designing, production, the whole thing, and had my own brand. Came up to Sydney, a few years later, and actually got on the other side of the press release, so to speak, and became a PR, publicist. in fashion, lifestyle, all of that, and which I loved. And it was, it was a great time. It was a very glamorous and fun life. But it was kind of interesting, Amanda. Somebody at a dinner party once said to me, so what is it that you do? And I said, kind of really sort of, it was a glib question, and they were expecting a very sort of, prosaic response, and I kind of just said, I contribute to landfill, because all my clients,
Wow.
what I'm selling their products, you get as many column centimeters for them. And the more products they sell, the more packaging there is. And when I heard myself saying that, and I thought, this is not going to be a profession or a vocation that's going to take me out to the very end. So that was when I really decided, and I'd sort of had started family life as well. And maybe that also added a little bit to my sense of wanting to do something with greater meaning and greater purpose. All respect, though, to public relations people, etc. But for me, I'd really come to the end of my road. So I then went back to studying and received the qualifications, and then went through the clinical practice, and then ended up in private practice. But because I'd had such a diverse career and a strong career in communications, I used a lot of what I'd learned, a lot of the management practices in what I do today as a psychotherapist. And whilst I have a great range of clients, including, couples, individuals, etc., I also do a lot of executive and business coaching as well, because that is an area that is in my wheelhouse, because that has been my career experience as well.
Do you know what's so interesting about your story is that I've interviewed numerous women, and nearly all of them, barring a few, have changed careers over the course of their life in a similar vein to what you've explained, partly because, they maybe take a look at their life and think, this is not really what I want to do or what I want to continue to do. And so they come to a new career with so much insight and life experience. And I love that.
You're absolutely right. And I think that you come to it also not just from the point of view of I've got to pay my mortgage, or or any of those sort of more sort of the practical parts of life. You come to it because you really want to be there. And I think whenever you're entering this profession in a similar vein as to what you're doing, ultimately you do want to be in service of others. You want other people to, it's more than just wanting to help them. It's wanting them to help themselves get to where they need to go to in their lives. And for me, I felt that the satisfaction in that was simply not going to be available to me in my previous professions. So this is one that I feel is something that really matters to me and has great meaning for me. And one that I love every day. Every day I learn about from my clients. They teach me, as I said, through professional development. But it's there are insights every single day in my life.
Well, that sounds amazing. When you came to that point that you thought, okay, I want to move out of the PR fashion industry, what was it then that drew you towards psychotherapy? Why was that your choice?
That is a really interesting question. I mean, I think that, I think you have to be an effective communicator, and you have to be an effective listener. More than even a communicator, you've got to be an effective listener. And that's something actually that the PR world does teach you. I mean, you're there with your clipboard, and you're having to listen to people and what they want, and listen to briefs. And I think that that's really important. For me, it was something that was very deeply innate and I felt it more, not as a cognitive or even an intellectual sort of draw. It was much more of an intuitive thing. I really felt that I could make a difference. And, I've taken a very different approach in my practice to many other psychotherapists and psychologists. And I feel that my clients really benefit from it. I do long form sessions, and I also take a very narrative approach. So a client that is presenting is not just presenting the problem, they're presenting their story to me. And that's how I treat it in session.
Oh, that sounds amazing. And I want to delve into that a bit more. But before we do, I thought it would be useful if you could clarify to me and our listeners the difference between psychotherapy and psychology?
That's a really, really good question, and a lot of people get get too confused. Of course, there is crossover with the two. I mean, and you may get oftentimes get psychologists that use the psychotherapy approach, but essentially the approach with psychology is to empower the client with skills and strategies in order to better cope or fix their lives, whereas for me, psychotherapy is not about addressing the symptoms or the problems per se, but the actual causes, and to discover what really lies underneath the problem and to create a meaning behind that problem. So, so that the client, it doesn't become a symptomatic kind of way, like the doctors, I've got these symptoms, this is what you need to take, problem solved. For me, in my own definition of psychotherapy, and what seems to be the general understanding, is that it takes a deeper look as to what is going on for the client.
That's really interesting. So it sounds like, as you say, it goes really deep, which I can imagine it would take a little while to build up that trust with a client so they can really sort of tell you about the root of the problems, or you can help them discover it. Maybe they can't see it until they've come to see you.
Oh, that's absolutely right. I mean, and I do I think with psychology, and definitely in clinical psychology, it tends to be, it's a very scientific process. And it tends to be diagnostically driven. So you will oftentimes, a client will come back, being diagnosed as having anxiety or depression or perhaps a disorder. I am absolutely not diagnosed driven. People are people, and they come with their stories. So, for instance, what a psychologist might classify as depression, I might classify as chronic grief, and it tends to be the vocabulary, certainly for me as a psychotherapist, is far more expansive than that of what I've seen. I mean, I've seen both. I mean, as a therapist, it's good to go and see psychologists and good to go and see, your peers. And I find in the psychotherapy world, it's much more expansive. The vocabulary is more expansive, and it's not a scientific vocabulary in the same way that the psychology in the psychologist world. That is also my take on it.
Yeah, the way you practice.
Yes.
Well, what's interesting to me in what you just said is that words matter.
Yes,
and I think that it could be the case, and you correct me if I'm wrong because I honestly don't know, but if you give someone a diagnosis of a certain disorder, depression, ADHD, whatever, it might cause them to really behave in a way where they're kind of living into that diagnosis. Does that make any sense?
I mean, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But also the language is really important with what you've just said, because if you get a diagnosis, for instance, as depression, right? So what are you going to say? I'm depressed, right? And you become defined by that. Whereas there are so many different parts of you. There are so many different aspects of you. And that is I think, a fairly sort of reductionist view of the self, right?
Yeah.
There are so many parts of us. And there's also situational things going on. You may be in that moment experiencing darker thoughts or be in a state of malaise, but that could be your situation. So and I understand, we sort of live also in a society where, we want a quick fix. We have, when you think about mental health rebates for psychologists, they've only got 6 to 10 sessions to work with the client. So there is a lot of pressure for them to come up with solutions for the clients. In my area, it is, it takes a little bit from sort of the old Freudian or Jungian approach, which is psychodynamic. So I will have many clients that will come to me over many weeks, months, even years. And the type of therapy that I practice is called existential therapy, which is a philosophically based therapy, which lends from Viktor Frankl and Heidegger and a lot of the philosophers, as opposed to psychologists. And the interesting thing about that is it's the search for meaning and purpose. not
Yeah.
happiness and not fixing things, but how do we live with ourselves and who we are, and how do we manage our experience of life?
How do we be in this world?
Spot on.
Every patient or client will have different reasons for coming to see you. Do you think for some people it's good to see both a psychologist and a psychotherapist? Can they work in tandem in that way?
They could. I mean, it's a very expensive sort of way to go.
It probably is.
And I mean, and you could become, I think, a therapy junkie, and you don't want to become a therapy junkie either. You know, it depends. You know, Amanda, it's all about the rapport that you have with that person, and ultimately, we are in the helping with the profession, and if they feel that they are being helped, if they feel whichever, you know, and it could be any modality, you know. You know, it doesn't even need to be in the areas of therapy. There could be other things. You can get as many benefits on the mat. You know, in a yoga studio, there are, you know, all of the, you can have a convergence of therapies that work together, you know, in a really beautiful symbiotic way. But I mean, but to your question, for sure. But I think that we're seeing, you know, I have a number of psychologists that are actually clients because they prefer my approach, the psychotherapy, the existential approach, which is also probing and questioning. And it's definitely a dialogue. You know, we are workshopping together who this person is, and understanding the skin that they live in. And it's not a scientific approach at all. It's quite esoteric, and it can be, you know, and it's really exciting because, you know, you as a subject are the most exciting person. You can, you know, so the more that you know about yourself, even the dark side of yourself, the shadow self, as Jung would call it, the more that you get to live your life on your terms and with truth.
And also, I think if you know yourself, you can then perhaps be a better partner, mother, friend. If you're sort of more secure in your own being, then you can maybe give more. I don't know. I'm just thinking as we're talking.
I mean, it's harder than it's easier said than done because we're so used to we're so used to sort of presenting ourselves in order to please others or what we think we should be. But ultimately, that is the goal to rather than living our best lives, that we live our true lives.
Our true lives. So that's probably a good segue to asking you, what is your counselling philosophy?
Look, it all, you know, like if you're sitting with a couple, for instance, you know, it's never about who's right or wrong. It's about points of view. And your subjective reality is the only thing that matters. Your story and your view on a situation or on yourself is my starting point for the therapy. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm a soft touch and that whatever you say to me is I'm going to take as you know, that's, you know, it's valid, but I'm not going to necessarily validate it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reflect back to you, because you're not sitting in the chair for its own sake. I mean, you know, you're sitting there because you've come with an issue or with some sort of dilemma that you're trying to work through, and that's why you're seeking counsel. So oftentimes, you know, for me, the story is everything. It's paramount, and their point of view is absolutely essential. But this is a dialogue, and it is about the client ultimately understanding themselves and their situation, you know, as best they can to empower themselves to live through that situation on their own terms.
Yeah, because I think for many of us, especially in the modern world that we live in, I've heard us referred to as moderns.
Yes,
we live such a fast-paced life that we don't have a lot of time to reflect and think about our desires, our longings, our past, our traumas. And even if we do, we may need help to work through those, which is obviously where you would come in. So I wanted to talk a bit about what you refer to as the other pandemic. If you look at the Google search trends, which I find are always really interesting in terms of what's going on in the world, the word pandemic spiked in January 2022. And prior to that, I would say, you know, everyone knows what the word pandemic means, but it's probably a word we didn't use very much in a day-to-day basis. But now everyone uses that word all the time. We're
Yes.
very familiar with it. One of the areas that you write about in the article in the Wellbeing magazine that I referred to in the introduction is what you call the other pandemic of stress and sadness and loneliness. So can you talk to us about that, and what have you noticed, and how has it manifested for people?
Well, look, I definitely think loneliness has become a very big part of our society. And I think, and I'm not going to be sort of having a bash at social media, but I think social media has definitely put into sharp relief the lives that we live in dark rooms with our blue screens, and the sort of the false reality that we present about ourselves, to our audience, and that audience is sometimes is not even known to us. Even if they're classified, say, as Facebook friends or followers or whatever it might be. So I think that we have become almost self-isolationists, and the pandemic definitely contributed to that. I think it made it even harder for us to connect, and to your sort of notions of terminology, the whole idea of things like social media was to create platforms where we are connecting more with other people. We're not.
No.
The digital connection to other people is a very superficial way of connecting. What you and I are doing, even though right now we're doing this wonderfully using social media, we're still in conversation. I can see you. I'm talking to you. This is not me sending a snap or, sending a soundbite to you, or also sending something in there to present a concept of who I am to you. This is a real conversation between two people as we get to know each other. So I think, yes, and without even getting religious here, but the absence of God has meant that we ourselves are our own gods. And so there is so much reliance on us to be happy and to make the most of this life. And, and I think the more that we do that, we're feeling more and more out of control. Our own sort of, our anchor within ourselves seems to have kind of lost its, its port.
Its grip. Yeah. It's so ironic that something that's meant to bring us together and connect us, as in social media, is actually having in the real world the opposite effect, isn't it? It's making really us feel lonely.
It really is. And I think, and as I said, it's become very reductionist. I mean, somebody will send a photograph of a beautiful sunset and say something like, hashtag gratitude, it's kind of like, well, yeah, right. Yeah, no, it's beautiful. But, it feels you're doing that. You're playing to your audience. You're looking to get the likes. So you're actually in performance mode. This is not the quiet self-observation that you actually really do need in order for you to be able to live a more fulfilled life. And it is interesting, Amanda. I do think that the type of therapy that I practice, which is this existential therapy, I think that it certainly appeals to certainly my clients, because they get to be in conversation. And yes, of course, they're talking about themselves and they're talking about the things that matter to them, but they're talking about it in a way that is truly getting underneath their own skin and trying to understand why they're doing what they're doing, what is motivating them, the factors in their life that have caused some of their own fatal internal flaws. All of these types of ideas about self, where they were manifested, how they've come to be, is the life they're leading the life that they envisaged? And is it the true life that they envisage? So they get to ask these questions, which are complex questions. And I think that's the really exciting thing about, if you're in, the type of therapy that I'm doing. I think that's what I think really appeals to them, rather than the sound bites or the as I said, the hashtags, sort of the litany of hashtags that are out there that are rendered meaningless after a while.
Yeah, I totally agree. In terms of the example you gave of a sunset, it's much more meaningful to watch the sunset yourself or with a friend or partner than see someone else's picture of a sunset somewhere in the world, isn't it?
And then sort of like, if we're getting really sort of deep, if you didn't photograph that sunset, did that sunset even exist? I think there's also that sort of, which is, I know more in the unconscious sort of sense. If I don't record this, if I don't photograph this and post it to my followers, then this sunset never happened and I was never here. So it's that sense that I cannot have this experience for myself as a complete subjective experience. It has to be broadcast so that you know that I've had this experience.
Here at Vibrant Lives podcast, as most of you know, I'm passionate about how to live the healthiest life possible. When it comes to supplements and health promoting products, I look behind the claims to make sure they're well formulated and backed by science. Lately, I've been testing out the world's first productivity shot called Magic Mind, and let me tell you, it's a little gem. Plus, it is backed by a team of well-respected doctors and scientists like Dr. Andrew Weil, which is important to me. So Magic Mind is a blend of 12 active natural ingredients, including matcha green tea, honey, adaptogens, which can help you reduce the effects of chronic stress, and nootropics that enhance your productivity and focus. After 5 days in a row of taking Magic Mind, which I did in the morning with my morning coffee, so it was part of my morning ritual, I noticed that I was able to focus quickly. When I sat down at my desk, I was able to launch into my work straight away, and this is great for me because I often spend a bit of time shuffling papers around my desk before I can actually start my work. After 10 days in a row of taking Magic Mind, I noticed that my focus and concentration lasted longer. In fact, it lasted for several hours, and I was able to get more work done in a shorter space of time. And I also felt really calm while I was working, which made the time fly by. So for me, taking my Magic Mind shot was like a guarantee of being more productive. With so many distractions in our busy lives, why not start your day with a natural brain power booster in the form of a shot of Magic Mind? So if you're curious about trying Magic Mind and experiencing a deep state of flow for yourself, you can receive 40% off your subscription for the next 10 days with my code Vibrant20. Simply go to the website at magicmind.co/vibrant and enter the discount code, that's Vibrant20, at checkout to receive your discount. And I will put a link to that in the show notes. So why not give Magic Mind a go, and please let me know how it's helped you. And now back to my conversation with Marie Rowland. We were talking about social media and some of its impacts.
That's why we have these sort of things like these fear of missing out and all of this other stuff, because there's this constant, we've got to keep up, we've got to, we've got to do, otherwise we don't matter, it's and that's where the self-reflection and the relationship with the self becomes so important.
Yeah.
And that's where, and that's where emotionally we become quite fragile people as well, because our relationship with ourselves is becoming less and less fortified.
That's so interesting. I often think about that in terms of young people, like, we don't matter. Because when I was a child, if two friends of mine went off and had a sleepover and a party and I wasn't invited, I never would have known about it.
That's right.
And I wouldn't have had the opportunity to think, I feel a bit left out, because, it just happened and it doesn't matter. Whereas these days, kids and teenagers are so aware when they're left out of something.
Yeah.
And so those feelings must be, when you're feeling when you're trying to find your way in the world in any event as a teenager, that must make it very difficult, I think.
Absolutely. I'm not enough.
Yeah.
I'm not enough. And that sense of, that sense of, and it has never changed, our need or desire to belong. Yeah. That's not something that belongs to any particular time. It's inbuilt into us. It's hardwired into us, the connection. So when you do see that, it really does mess with your sense of yourself. And you're that's the kind of the terrible, the dark side of social media, that if you are excluded, it is amplified that you're not good enough.
Yeah. Oh, that's tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, it is tricky. It is tricky. And that's why we're seeing so much distress with teenagers. We're seeing mood swings, mood disorders. We're seeing all sorts of different things going on with them because of their sense of belonging and their desire to be included, to be accepted.
Yeah, very much. I mean, as you say, it's from time immemorial. We like to be included and accepted, and those feelings are particularly important for teenagers, I think.
That's right.
So I'd like to talk about emotional immunity, which is what you wrote about in your article. So I would say it's probably impossible to exist in this world and not suffer from emotional pain at some point in our lives. I mean, it's just part of being human. And emotional pain is obviously different for different people, and it can have different causes. So in the world of therapy or psychotherapy, what does emotional pain mean?
Well, it's as simple as you kind of refer to it. It is our response or reaction to anything that might happen to us where we have an emotional response. And obviously, we would love to be happy. We would love to be inspired. We love the feeling of being loved, and all of our hormones respond to that. And we want to reciprocate that love back. But emotional pain is when we feel grief, hurt, disappointment, even a sense of disillusionment. Our ideas of self are not what what we thought that they should be. So emotional pain is any time where we feel that our coping mechanisms are challenged, our stressors are activated, and oftentimes emotional pain, the instant response can be the fight, flight, freeze response. If somebody says something that is hurtful or even creates an agitated or an angry response, it's our hormones that respond even before our cognitive and our emotional senses.
Yeah, that's right. And part of, I'm sure, what you do is helping people harness their intellectual response to something, so you can help self-calm, when your emotions go crazy.
Absolutely. And it is interesting because the cognitive and the emotional response can also be at odds with each other. The cognitive response can be faulty, or it could be trying to explain things that don't make sense. So the emotional response is usually the truer response, because that's feeling. That's your instant response is how you're feeling. So oftentimes, clients will want to respond from their cognitive point of view. They want to respond from their intellect. But if you do try to do try to go to where the locus is of their feelings and where that sits, and it's in your gut, and it's what you're feeling, very deep down in yourself. And when you get clients to explain that, what's going on for them emotionally, that's when the truth of their situation comes out.
Right. To me, it links into the way our gut and our brain and our whole bodies, in fact, our physical and emotional, it's all linked. You can't separate one from the other.
Absolutely.
And we're learning that more and more in the world of science, medicine, neurology, nutrition, how we're so connected in our entire being.
And isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful now that we have, we're not seeing ourselves as separate parts, but that they all work together. In this area of emotional immunity, which is, what I wrote about in that article that you read, we now know that there's a field called psychoneuroimmunology. Can you believe this?
Wow.
Right? Psychoneuroimmunology. And it examines how the brain and the endocrine and the immune system work together when they are communicating the meaning of things to ourselves. And one of the areas in that sort of field is something that's called affective immunology. So it's the affective emotions and how that affects your body, how it affects your somatic responses. And we know that, like even the expression, "Oh my goodness, I went weak at the knees," you're describing that to somebody almost metaphorically, but in actual fact, the feeling is real. That feeling of being weak at the knees is a physical experience, even though I might be relating it to you, Amanda, as a metaphorical concept. So it's really interesting that our emotions, whether they are negative or positive, they are actually affecting our own cell biology, and
Yes.
and we are seeing this in our somatic responses.
And it's a fascinating time to be in the world of science because we're just learning more and more and more, aren't we?
It's amazing. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Like I think the area of neuroscience and this area where we're starting to understand, like even the endocrine system, it's it's a brilliant, brilliant system where, obviously, you've got these hormones that are chemical messengers that feed into the bloodstream, but they affect things like growth and development and, mood. And, so for instance, if you're seeing a stressed out teenager and, you can see that actually it is affecting their physical well-being, their growth, their sense of all of these different types of things. And now we're learning more about, I am not an expert on it. I sort of dabble into it as more as something that I'm really interested in. And certainly when I'm seeing adolescent clients, you can see their physical deterioration because of their emotional issues.
Yeah. Well, as we say, it does make perfect sense. And now we're coming to understand it more and more.
Indeed.
So when we're talking about emotional pain and emotional immunity, it would be great to have some tips from you about what we can do to build up our emotional immunity so when things go wrong or we're not feeling great, it doesn't completely sink us. So let's talk about what emotional immunity is and how it can look.
Absolutely. So it is the ability to, for me, the simplest way that I can put it is that it is the ability to use our emotional resources and our external resources, such as connection and support from other people, to create a homeostasis or to create an equilibrium so that we don't, to use your term, we don't sink. We don't fall into ourselves. And it's really interesting. If you take a look at the immune system is actually fascinating in the sense that it uses its, the complex network of organs and cells and proteins to defend the body against infection and viruses. And you would know this because you're a nutritionist, but what it does is that this immune system is so brilliant. It actually keeps a record of every germ or microbe that we've ever had to fight against. And it kind of keeps it in almost like a sort of a digital library in the body, right? So that it can recognize it and destroy any kind of foreign virus or microbe if it re-enters the system. And I like to think of emotional immunity like that in the same way. So if, for instance, you've gone through a breakup, heartbreak, which, you're never going to be released from emotional pain. You're never going to, be able to sidestep that. But how do we yield to that? How do we experience that? And if you have some coping strategies, such as showing up and being seen to the people that love and support you and saying, I'm really having a difficult time here, I need a hug, or I'd really like to talk about what's going on for me. What happens is that you build up your own network in the same way that your immune system does, of having different systems that you can put in place. So when you have a situation that might occur like that a couple of years down the track, and it could be any kind of situation, you've actually got this pool of sort of, fighters that can help you or assist you fighting off this emotional pain and making you more emotionally resilient.
So it's like building your library, to use that analogy again, of your emotional protectors or emotional immune system. So one, you mentioned being seen, and I found that really interesting because that's about, it's not about so much physically being seen, it's more about opening up and expressing how you feel. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. And not a version of yourself that is, that like that what other people might want to see, but that the true version of yourself, like where you can be vulnerable and where you can say, I am not doing well. This is really hard. I'm having some dark thoughts. I'm not feeling safe within myself. All of this, these things that you can speak about. And even if that person can't help you, you can go to therapy, or you can do other things that will help you get through a difficult moment in your life. And I really want to stress that, actually, Amanda, that, there's that beautiful Persian saying, which is, this too shall pass. Yeah. And I really love it. And from my own personal experience, and your listeners, yourself, me, we've all been in dark places. We've all been at that place where we thought, is this going to stop? I'm having a really, really bad time. And, that little saying, this too shall pass, has really helped me. And it's not one of those kind of, little glib affirmations. It is the truth that this time in my life, it is really hard, and I've got to get through it. And I've got to, rely on lots of different things, like using perspective, relying on other people, maintaining my health and well-being. There are a bunch of things that you can do, managing your day, putting it all into bite-sized forms so that it doesn't become overwhelming, managing the overwhelm, but to know that whatever dark place you're in at the moment, it will pass.
Yeah, it sounds simple, but it's profoundly true, isn't it?
Profoundly true.
Yeah.
Yes.
I had a be seen experience last week. My father's not very well, and I met up with two very close girlfriends to go for a walk, and I had no intention of even mentioning my father. They know what's going on. Yes. But for some reason, as soon as I saw them, I just burst into floods of tears, and I couldn't stop crying. And they were so sweet. They gave me a big hug, and then we went on our walk, and I felt so much better afterwards.
Yes.
It was amazing.
Absolutely.
At first I was embarrassed. I was like, oh my gosh, how awkward for them that I'm crying. But they're good friends. They didn't mind.
And I think, Amanda, that's actually a really important point that you inadvertently bring up. When I say be seen, I'm not saying that, you go into a public space and you pick some random and, and you say, hey, I'm not having a good day. I don't think I think you have to be, you have to be selective with the people that are also wanting to see you and that you feel safe with as well. That's part of the equation of being seen. And I think, it's what a lovely thing for you. And it was totally an emotional release, wasn't it? It wasn't
totally.
You having to explain what was going on. No. In that moment, you allowed your emotions just to let go and to be released. And you yielded into that, which is really lovely.
And it was obviously not planned. It was very spontaneous.
Yes.
Yes, but I guess if I'd been with people I wasn't as comfortable with, maybe that would not have happened. Maybe because I felt very safe with these friends, I could just let it all go.
Yes.
Yeah. Some of the other tools we can use to build our emotional immunity, you talk about resilience. So how can we train our resilience?
I mean, resilience is one of those interesting propositions, because I think that, you have coaches even nowadays that talk about, building resilience, but resilience comes in all shapes and sizes, and it's also a heritable factor. It's
right.
So, you could have two children in the same family who experience the same difficulties or trauma, and there's a whole bunch of variables going on in and of itself, but they may have different resilience. You might have one child that actually copes really well and seems to be able to manage themselves and have a locus of control, whereas the other child is very fragile and doesn't have that. And it can be very difficult for parents in that situation, because parenting can be a one-size-fits-all. If we can be good parents and we apply the same principles or the same ideology for parenting from one to the next, but it doesn't work because everybody comes with their own different sets of resilience. So I think that's a really important thing to think about, what we come into the world with. But certainly with resilience, I think one of the sort of the big buzzwords in therapy is, self-compassion, and really being able to, not all the time be the inner critic, and to really cut yourself some slack, give yourself a bit of a break with what you're going through. And that actually is an incredibly good coping mechanism to sort of use self-love to build up your stores of resilience too. And there are external things, like I touched upon before with resilience. We know, for instance, endorphins are a painkiller, morphine, codeine, etc.
Yep.
So when you go and exercise, even if you're going through your pain barrier with exercise, then you have that hit of endorphin, which actually then takes, the pain does subside, and it's almost like a rush that you have after that.
Yep.
So oftentimes, it's really good to do those different types of things, but also it's a form of moving meditation as well. And it takes you away from the issue or the situation that is causing you strife or grief or disillusionment. So there are the resilience, it is like a muscle that needs to be flexed. I will say that. You can't just expect, for it to just manifest within yourself. You have to help yourself through seeking out support, doing the self-care parts of your world, and also I think looking at things with some perspective. I really like the physical image of when you're looking at a problem, to be able to almost pull focus and to sort of get a wide-angled lens at what your issue might be, and to be able to scope it in a different way. Because sometimes when you're inside of the problem, it can be very overwhelming and you kind of don't know which way to go. Whereas when you pull yourself out of it, you can say, okay, this is what's going on for me. What are some of the things that I can do? What is in my control where I can manage it? And the parts where I don't have control, how can I just be in flow? And how can I just live with the parts that I can't do anything about?
I mean, that's obviously harder than it sounds.
Yeah.
But I also think that is one of the gifts of getting older. You do, I think, naturally through life's ups and downs, you gain more perspective. And I think as a parent, that's something that I'm quite aware of. My children will come to me with a problem of some kind, which is consuming their life at that moment. And I can look at it and sort of see past it just because I'm older and I've had those experiences myself. So I think that perspective is definitely something that we can learn.
Absolutely. But at any age, I think also with, and I think it's hard, isn't it, though, when you're talking to younger people, even with my clients that are younger, if you use the language of perspective, they can be a little bit contemptuous of that, because it has that sense of, it will be all right in the end, it can feel that I am minimizing what's going on for them.
Absolutely.
So sometimes what's really helpful is to reframe their situation and put a different view on it. So, oftentimes it's not what we're looking at, but the view that we're looking at it from, and if you can just say, well, hang on, I'm just wondering, what if you looked at it from this point of view? Or I'm wondering what your friend thought when he or she said this. And suddenly what they are learning to do is that they're learning to actually put themselves into the shoes of others. And it is a part of empathy training, which I think is really important nowadays, because we are inside of our own bubbles, that connective tissue that helps me mirror your feelings. And and we know this with mirror neurons, that's not happening as much. But if I can be more empathic with you, it means that I'm going to be able to understand my responses to what's going on at any given time. So I think reframing perspective is, I think, are really helpful notions for anybody at any time of their life.
And is that something that we can just practice? Like when we feel ourselves, I guess, getting into a funk or something, we can try and talk to ourselves and say, okay, what are some other ways of looking at this problem? Is that a helpful thing to do?
That's exactly right. Or when was the last time I was in this situation and how did I handle it? and going back, like with the cells fighting, if it comes across a microbe or a virus it's encountered before, it knows how to destroy it. It knows how to get rid of it. And I think, when, sometimes we'll be in a situation, even, with friends, and you are coming across, hey, this is really familiar. I've been in this situation before. And maybe I was the one at fault, or maybe the other person, I'm feeling hurt by what the other person said to me. But the way I reacted last time was not really helpful. So I'm going to take a different approach. I'm going to come at it in a different way. And and that requires reflection, and self-awareness, which are also, it's not as common as what we think. We're very reactive rather than responsive. So, we're very seldom, it's hard for us to kind of connect back into ourselves and think, what's my role in this? And that can be, that's very helpful when, even if you're in the wrong, let's say, or you have been the agitator, if you have accountability, that really helps you with your resilience. It makes you a stronger person, being accountable, being responsible, owning up, it really strengthens your sense of resolve, your character. It makes you a bigger person.
Another one of your tips for building our emotional immunity, and I like this one, is have fun and be silly. So give yourself permission to let go from time to time. So how can that look for people?
I mean, when you think about it, our lives are in order. We have, schedules that we keep to. We are, there's this, like how much I shouldn't have another piece of cake. And I'm not talking about, and I've got to be really clear here, it's not about overindulging. It's not about passively, giving over to watching sort of, binge watching Netflix. I definitely mean it in a more active way.
Right.
Like, put on your favorite dance track and go crazy. Have and have a dance, with yourself or with other people or whatever. Have fun. I mean, I think that I don't want that. That certainly doesn't mean to me. I'm not encouraging people going and getting hammered, at a bar or anything like that. Although that's fun, that's great. But that also moves into self-medicating. I'm going to escape from my problems. I'm going to run away from myself. I'm going to absolve myself of responsibility. That is not at all what I mean by that. What I mean is genuinely being inside of your own skin and having fun. So, Amanda, when I was telling you about, going and doing flamenco, right? So
oh, yes.
I'll go and do a dance class. And at that stage, and when I'm in that moment and you've got your shoes on and your practice skirt on and whatever, I am no longer a mother or a therapist or a partner or a friend. I am just Marie, and I'm in my moment, and I'm in full expression of myself. And, I get absorbed in the beautiful guitar, or I'll get absorbed in the beautiful choreography, and I am having fun, and I'm with other people that are like-minded. I'm in a little community, and yes, I might be getting back in my car and having to go back to work and into session, or, having to deal with some issue. But for that time, I'm in my moment, and I'm having so much fun. I guess that's really what I'm trying to say. It's not about escape. It's about expression of self.
Yeah. Dancing and singing are fun ways to do that.
Totally.
Do you use castanets in your dancing?
We use castanets. We use fans. We use shawls. Yes. So it's the whole box of dice. I'm doing a really good advertisement for flamenco here. So all you flamenco teachers out there, if you're listening to this podcast, make sure you dial it up with potential clients.
Oh, that's fantastic. I wanted to talk to you about self-compassion, which you mentioned before. And sorry, I'm not seeking a personal therapy session here, I promise you. But I have been told in the past that I have a very punitive voice in my head. And to be honest, I think that probably a lot of people have that. Why are we so hard on ourselves?
Yeah, the inner critic never seems to quiet down, does it? I mean, I think, self-compassion is not something that we're even taught, or that is actually part of our emotional lexicon. And I think you're probably naturally a driven person. I mean, the fact is, in order for you to be doing what you're doing, there would have been some discipline that was required. There was, and I think that you are allowed to critique yourself, but you've got to do it in a constructive and a compassionate way. And I think that's the difference. I also think that, if we, to get sort of a little bit sort of psychology sort of on you, with attachment theory and in those early years, oftentimes we emulate the way that our parents parented as well, the expectations that they may have for us, etc. And we do emulate that. So even if we had very loving parents, but parents that were, had expectations, that becomes, part of our own internal working systems. So it's, and I am not going to go into a psychology session with you, but this has probably been a part of your being, part of your psyche for a very, very, very long time, even right back to the beginning.
But I read somewhere that women are often harder on themselves than men. And I'm not sure if that's true or if gender has anything to do with it at all. But is that something, what would you say to that?
I would say anecdotally, I think that's about right. Yeah. I think that is the cultural norm. And I think it's like, if you're in a Pilates class and, your teacher comes in and corrects you, a woman's more likely to say, oh, sorry, whereas a guy will go, oh, thanks.
Yeah, good point.
And I think that that's become part of our neural wiring. And I think it's also because, women have been treated like second-class people for time immemorial, for goodness sakes. I mean, there are some countries where it's a way of life, that they are second-class. I mean, even in Western countries, we are identified differently to men. So there is, I think that, we always come with an apology. We always come with sort of, having to work just that little bit harder to sort of prove ourselves. And, we're seeking validation in a different kind of way. I will say to you, though, I do think, though, at a deeper level, you do get men, though, that can be just as hard on themselves and just as critical, even though that they may have more confidence, so to speak, and they they have a different, as I said before, to use that example, they won't say sorry because they're getting corrected. Rather, they'll just acknowledge it and say thanks, which I think is a big difference between men and women. But they can still be really, really tough on themselves, that their expectations of success can be different. I mean, if a woman is a mum, for instance, the idea of being successful in a career maybe not as full on as what it is for a man.
Yeah, there's different pressures, of course.
That's right.
Yeah. In the article, which I've referred to a few times now, and I just wanted to say thank you for that article because I found it really helpful, which is why I reached out to you. And you said to me that you had a lot of response from that article. So thank you on behalf of everyone. And in that article, you mentioned Stoicism. And I'm very interested in Stoicism. I don't know a lot about it yet. I've tried to read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. So there is bits of it that I just sit there scratching my head. I think I'm not quite sure I'm understanding this, but I'm going to persist. And I dip into the Daily Stoic podcast with Ryan Holiday from time to time. I really like him. So he delivers the message in a really easy to understand way, which is something I think is a great skill. And I also think it's fascinating that in our modern society, we can learn so much from ancient wisdom, whether it be Buddhism or Stoicism. In case listeners want to find out a bit more, it might be nice to plant the seed. So perhaps you can explain to us who were the Stoics and in a nutshell, what does it mean? What's it all about?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I am a Stoic and I love it. I think it's incredibly modern, and I think it's a much more sophisticated version of resilience as well. Like, it's in the sense that it is it has, yes, you're right, it is a bit more complex, but the ideas are still very accessible. And I think Amanda, I think that Stoicism is also the antidote to this unbridled positivity that I think has definitely been a part of sort of the early 21st century, where, it's positivity, 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 positivity. And the problem with that is when things go wrong, we don't have the emotional resources to actually deal with it, because we've almost been inculcated or brainwashed that if we don't think positively, then we are sad sacks, or that we are, that we are doom and gloomers. That's not the case. I think Stoicism is really, reality thinking, on steroids. But it is not pessimism. I mean, the example that I like to use for Stoicism is that a Stoic will take an umbrella out on a sunny day, but a pessimist will not go out on a sunny day for fear that it might rain. So the Stoic is still going out there and will still be a part of life, but they take precautions. They understand that life tosses up so many different variables and there is so much outside of our control that the only control that we have is the control that we exert ourselves in how we respond to a life that can be overwhelming and out of control. And the Stoics had 4 virtues, so to speak, and those virtues were wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. And they're really beautiful. I think they're beautiful terms because they're not didactic terms. Like you've talked a lot about wisdom today and experience, and it's a gentle thing that you gather over the years of your life, and you use that to moderate your life, to live your life, to pass on good advice to those that might be seeking it from you. Courage is such a beautiful word as well. It is not about going and fighting wars or being confrontational. It's the courage to be yourself. It's the courage to say, "Hi, I'm Marie. This is who I am." I like me. I like me. Hopefully, we'll have a connection. But it is the strength to be yourself. Justice is an incredibly important virtue, and in this time where all we see is the polemic between the right and left, and it's horrible, and it's about the person who's got the loudest voice. Justice is about right and wrong, and it's the courage to be able to stand up for what you believe is right, which I think is really important. And this is a word that, the last of the virtues is temperance, which is not a word that is commonly used today.
It's not a modern word.
No, it's not a modern word, but it is a very quiet word. And it is that is the approach to life, to approach things with, a calmness, with a sense of equilibrium.
Humility, maybe.
Humility, grace. It's a beautiful word, it's a very gentle word, and it's about absolutely not being non-reactive. It is about responding with kindness and generosity. And I think that is so important in our times. But, the leading lights of Stoicism, I mean, you can go back to the forerunners, which were the Greeks, and take a look at what Epictetus said, and his approach was always about, it's not what you're looking at, but how you approach what you're looking at. That's really what it's about. And then what I think might be accessible to your listeners is the works of Seneca. And he was like the Roman philosopher who actually was the teacher for Nero. And it was really funny because, he, as a Stoic, he said to Nero, well, hey, I'm, it's all good and well for me to be your teacher, but, you are all powerful and you can, do anything to me. You can kill me, you can exile me, you can do whatever. And Nero at the time, who was a young boy, said, of course not, you are my hero, I respect and I love you and all of that. But, the Stoic was right. In the end, he was exiled. And I think he had to, correct your listeners can correct me, but I think he had to, poison himself in the same way that Socrates did. And he ended up dying by his own hand, but forced, but obviously by the external. So the Stoic really understands the nature of life and also the nature of death as well, and that nothing is predictable, nothing is a certain. And the problem with positivity is it makes all of these assumptions about yourself and about the world that you live in, the externalities of life, and it's all got to be going your way. And it just doesn't.
Just doesn't. We know that.
It just doesn't.
In a lot of conversations about, self-compassion and how we can build emotional immunity and things like that, we talk a lot about seek help, talk to others, tell people how you're feeling. But I often think, but we need to be that to others as well.
Yes,
it can't always be us looking for everyone else to help us. We need to be able to support others too. So it's and that's how communities grow, isn't it?
I definitely think so. I think that, and we know the research shows that, the more that we are, that we seek to help others, the more restored we feel, the more complete we feel. And once again, in a society that is, so much centering on the individual, it has a very much an egocentric spin on it nowadays. I think that we've lost that to some extent, and it is a shame, because there is so much gratification when you do give to others.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much we've covered, and so much more. But I think we need to start wrapping up, because we've both got busy lives here.
We do, and I'm going into session soon, so yes.
Oh, well, this is a good question then, because my next question I want to ask you is, what do you enjoy most about your work as a psychotherapist?
Oh, that's such a great question, and it's such a big question, but I'm going to keep my answer small. I think it's a word that you've used a lot in this in this interview, but it is about connection. At a very selfish level, I do get an enormous amount of pleasure out of helping others, and sometimes you'll get a response where where a client will just say, you've helped me so much, or you've made a real difference in my life. And I honestly, Amanda, I don't get an ego boost of that. I honestly feel a sense of gratitude that I've been able to play that role, because as an existentialist, my life is about having meaning and purpose, and this is where I get meaning and purpose. This is where, when you see clients, when they have a light bulb moment, or they have a revelation about self, or you see a situation where they were in crisis, or when a couple was in crisis, and they write you a note and say, we are doing so well. We are
wonderful.
It's actually life-changing for me. And it absolutely affirms what I do and why I do it. And I will say that the human condition, and this is something that I've always felt, even at the beginning of my life, when I was reading and exploring what it is to be me and what it is to be in this world, the human condition has always fascinated me. Why are we the way we are? And every time that somebody sits inside of me, for me, it is a new study into the human condition. They are a unique being, and when they present their story to me, it allows me to explore this amazing person that's sitting across from me.
It's a real privilege from the sound of it. Yeah. And on a practical note, Christmas is around the corner, and for many people, Christmas, the festive season, whatever it should be referred to, is a time of family and sharing and joy. But unfortunately for some people, it's not that. It can be a time of loneliness and isolation, and sometimes it can be stressful. Being with family or in-laws can, for some people, be stressful. Do you have some tips on how we can maintain our equilibrium if we find Christmas a stressful time?
It's a really good question, and I think that plan. I think for people, especially for people that experience anxiety, it can be overwhelming, and the introvert can definitely find it really difficult during these times. So always have your exit strategies. Always have a way that you can create a time out if you are in those different types of situations. I always look at it like a cinema. When you go into a cinema, especially people that get claustrophobic, they always look for their exits, right? Yes. And so they know, and then once they've located where their exits are, and they've put themselves into a position where they can get to that exit if need be, they can then enjoy the film and never even use that exit. So planning ahead is really important as to, the amount of time that you want to spend. Do you need to go out and have a break? That's really important. But to your point, it really does highlight how lonely this time of year can be. We have more people living in single home dwellings than ever before. And it's and some of those people have a very, very, very small group of connections. So it is really important for all of us that do have friends or family, that we look beyond ourselves and look to those people, ask people what they're doing over the Christmas period, see if they are going to be on their own. And I know some people are very cliquey when it gets to Christmas, but invite people into your lives. That's probably the one time in the year where generosity really counts, and the gift, and that's really where I think the gift of giving comes. But really manage yourself. I think for those people that do feel it is kind of overwhelming, planning is absolutely critical during that time of year.
Yeah, I like that. So plan.
Yes.
The final question that I ask all my guests is, if you could recommend 2 things that people could do, they could be anything at all, to improve their well-being, what would they be?
Oh, look, and this one's really easy for me because it is my life mantra. Show up. Absolutely show up. Whether things are going well or not, find your people that you can be yourself with, exactly like what you did with your girlfriends when you went for that walk. They are your life witnesses. They are the people that are going to remember things, years and years down the track. And they're going to be the people there that, are going to be your supporters and your celebrators. So showing up is absolutely critical. And that obviously sits with the be saying thing. And the other thing that I would say is that for yourself, we tend to have almost 2 lives, the lives that we present to the world and our true life. And when you do integrative therapy, what you're trying to do is you're trying to bring together that external self and that internal self, and you bring them together as one. And that is your true self that you present every single day to yourself and to the world. And I kind of think of that as self-actualization, and it is a daily thing for me. So, Amanda, as I speak to you today, like I am, I really don't like that word authentic, but what you see is absolutely what you get, outside of the fact that I use expletives, but I've been very good at this interview, and I haven't said anything. I have not been Hugh Grant at 4 weddings and a funeral, 4 weddings and a funeral. And that would be my super, super real self. But whatever you go away with today and your impression of me, that is who I am.
Yeah, I love that. That's just wonderful. And I imagine if you're melding the 2 selves, the internal and external, it's less stressful.
It's so less stressful. Absolutely.
You're just you.
It's so less stressful. It really is.
Thank you so much. It's just been a joy to talk to you. I've had such a wonderful time, and I feel like I've learned a lot. When I re-listen to this interview, I'll reflect on a lot of the things we talked about.
Amanda, I'll say right back at you. I've had so much fun. I've really enjoyed it. I feel as though we've become best friends. So, I love what you're doing. I admire what you're doing. I think you're doing something that is really important, and you're providing a great service to many people. Well done you as well.
Well, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day. It sounds like you've got some another session to go into.
Yes, no. I do. Thank you so much for the opportunity to have this chat. I've loved every minute of it.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode with psychotherapist Marie Rowland. The best place to contact Marie is via her website at talking-matters.com. So thank you so much for tuning in today. And if you did enjoy the episode and learn something from it, please tell your friends about it, because word of mouth is still the best way for people to find out about Vibrant Lives podcast. Please follow me on Instagram at vibrant_lives_podcast or on Facebook at Vibrant Lives Podcast. You can check out my website at vibrantlivspodcast.com, and there you will find a library of all my previous podcast episodes and reviews of health-related books that I recommend. You can also subscribe to my monthly newsletter where I'll keep you up to date with health and wellbeing news. Please let me know via the contacts page on my website or DM me if there's something you'd like to hear about or someone you'd like me to interview, or if you'd just like to say hi. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Eat well, move well, think well, live vibrantly.